Dose Daily, and welcome to Super Miscellaneous Sunday. My name is Karen Cavett, also known as Ex Perpetual Motion. I am a graphic design major at the Rhode Island School of Design, also known as RISD, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about typography. Fun! Now, a lot of people just don't really know anything about typography, but really it affects all of us every single day, all the time. Like, look around you right now, I'm sure you can find at least 100 examples of typography everywhere. Typography is basically the art of creating letter forms, arranging letter forms, basically anything that has to do with the written word. It might sound kind of boring right now, but it's really fun if you're a nerd. So I'm going to start with the anatomy of letter forms. Let's start with the stroke. That's basically just the line that makes up the letter form. The X height is the height of the lowercase x, typically about halfway between the cap height and the baseline. Remember when you first started writing, when there was that little dotted line between the two lines that would tell you where the lowercase letters would go up to? That's the X height. An ascender is the part of a lowercase letter that goes above the X height, and a descender is one that goes below the baseline. A serif is a little foot at the end of strokes. Sans serif type is essentially type without serifs. Now, typography also has its own unit of measurements. The point size is the distance from the top of the ascenders to the bottom of the descenders. There are 12 points in one pica and 6 picas in 1 inch. So when you write picas and points, you write the number of picas and then the lowercase letter p and then the number of points. So 6 picas and 7 points would be 6p7. Now, one of the really big things in typography is the leading, and that's the space between lines of type. Leading is generally measured in points, and you really just have to play it by ear. Like, there are definitely some rules about what good leading is for traditional type sizes and everything, but you really have to look at the X height. If something has a high X height, then it generally needs a lot of leading. You have to look at the contrast between the strokes. Something like Bodoni needs a lot more leading than something like Garamond. Of course, in experimental typography, people just throw all the rules out the window and do all kinds of crazy things. Speaking of typefaces, we also need to consider the different classifications of typefaces. Blackletter is the earliest printed type. It was created to mimic the handwriting of the monks who would create illuminated manuscripts. It was first printed by Johann Gutenberg in 1436. Next came Old Style around 1475, which was developed by Italian scholars. One of the best examples of Old Style type is Garamond. Then in the 1750s came Transitional type. This pretty much just lightened up Old Style type. It kind of thinned it out and just made it easier to read, since a lot of advancements had been made in typecasting and printing. The most prominent example is Baskerville. A bit later in the 1700s came Modern, which really accentuated the contrast between the really thin parts of the stroke and the really thick parts. The best example of this is Bodoni. In the early to mid 1800s came slab serif type, or square serif type. This was developed as advertising became a lot more popular and people were walking down the street and they needed to see your poster, and so this really jumped out at you, and it was just like, bam, in your face, really bold type. So a pretty good example of this is Rockwell, which personally I don't really like, but I mean, what can you do? It has its place in history. Then in the early 1900s came sans serif type. I mean, it had been around before the 1900s, but this was when people really started using it all the time. One of the best and most beautiful and wonderful examples is Helvetica, which is essentially like amazing, amazing, amazing. It's just, I can't even describe it. It's just so good. Other prominent sans serif typefaces include Futura and Universe. Okay, right now I think I'm just going to tell you some basic rules that you should all know. When designing a page, try not to use too many different fonts or different versions of fonts or lots and lots of colors just because you can. You really only need a little bit to create a really good hierarchy. Hierarchy being the very key word there. Graphic designers love hierarchy. Please, please, please do not use prime marks instead of quotation marks. Don't make your leading too tight. A paragraph that has the same leading as point size is called set solid, and that just looks really cramped and it's really hard to read. And so really give your words room to breathe. I mean, it's just nice. When writing in all caps, make sure you really go in by hand and set the tracking, because otherwise it just looks way too tight. When possible, try not to make your line length too short or way too long. 67 characters is considered the ideal line length. Be really careful justifying type on both sides. It can lead to really ugly looking rivers, and it's really just a really big mistake. When you're printing body type, try to keep it at around 10 points or so to keep it from looking too clunky. A lot of people's first instinct is to go for 12 points, but that can just look big and clunky and kind of ugly, and it can usually look a lot more professional if you just bring your type size down. If you have access to Helvetica, use it instead of Arial. Arial is just a cheap knockoff by Microsoft, and it's just not nearly as wonderful as Helvetica. Never ever use Papyrus or Comic Sans. I'm not even going to show you examples of them because I can't even look at them. Okay, there's so much I could talk about, but I really don't want to make this too long and be just rambling on about lots of type things. So if you want to see some of my work, you can visit my website, link in the sidebar, KarenCavett.com, and I've also linked some really awesome books over there that I think you should check out if you can, or if you want to learn more. I have some of them right here. For example, A Type Primer by John Kane, who is actually a teacher at RISD. This is a really great book for a beginning designer. Another really great book is Thinking with Type. I've had this since high school, and it's great. It just gives you a really good overview of lots of the stuff you need to know. And a really just fun book is Experimental Typography, which I actually just got out from the library because I'm poor and can't afford to buy all these wonderful books. I've also linked some really great type blogs if you don't want to go out and spend money on books. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and leave any questions or comments below, and I will read all of them and try to answer as many as I can, probably all of them. Michael, I will see you tomorrow. I almost forgot, and I have like 1 minute left on this tape, so I really have to hurry up. But questions. Okay, why don't you tell me what are your favorite fonts? I just think it's really interesting to know. And do you have any fun graphic design blogs or type blogs or anything that you like? Share them below. Or if you just have anything that you want to talk about type, I don't really have any more specific questions. Just talk about type because it's wonderful and amazing, and I will see you guys later. Go subscribe to me. Goodbye.